Elias Warwick came into Kearsley Junction, Nebraska, riding the rods under a cattle car in the January of 1934. He climbed down stiff. His hands had gone the color of the iron he'd been holding. On the platform, a loafer saw him, grinned, and flicked a lit cigarette into the tin cup of soaked coffee Warwick had set on the boards. The ember hissed and died in the cold brown water. Warwick did not flinch. He wiped the rim of the cup on his sleeve. He kept his eyes on his boots. Then Vernon Tolliver spoke up. "Grain elevator man. Good wool coat, buttoned to the throat." He said it loud enough for the dozen men warming their hands at the depot stove. "We don't feed vermin that rides the rails for free." A boy laughed. And the whole platform stood there and watched an old man take it. Coupled to the rear of the eastbound sat a private car. A flag hung off its rail, 2 stars, white on red. As the yard bull put a hand on Warwick and shoved, a folded thing dropped out of his boot. A pawn ticket. Greased dark, creased soft as cloth. It landed in the dust between the rails, and a gloved hand reached down to lift it, the hand of the general stepping off that car. We stop there, before he reads it. If you believe respect is earned in silence, this story is for you. Subscribe if you stand for the forgotten ones. And comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this old soldier's name travels. Now let me take you back to the cold end of that platform and show you the man. Elias Warwick had not always ridden under other men's freight. There had been a farm once. A quarter section outside Grand Island, corn and a little wheat. A wife named Ada, a plow horse he called Pete. The drought took the corn. The bank took the rest. Ada took a fever the winter after and did not come out of it. By the fall of 1932, there was nothing with his name on it but the clothes he stood in. So he did what 100,000 men did. He walked to the tracks. He learned to catch a freight on the fly. He learned to sleep sitting up with his knees drawn to his chest and to keep his boots on so nobody could steal them. Kearsley Junction was a drought-broke town like a lot of them. Main Street ran 4 blocks and 2 of them were boarded. The grain elevator threw its shadow over everything, and the depot was the only public heat for miles. A pot-bellied stove in the middle of the waiting room, a coal box beside it, and a lunch counter along the north wall run by a widow named Nell Pruitt. Men came in off the road just to stand near that stove an hour before the agent ran them out. It was the warmest thing the town gave away, and it gave it away grudging. Warwick did not stand at the stove. He never did. He took the far end of the platform out past the freight scale, where the wind came straight off the plane and cut. That was his way. He asked for nothing. He put himself where he'd trouble no one. A man learns, on the road, that the ones who crowd the heat get moved along first. So he sat on his heels in the cold, and he waited for the eastbound, and he did not look at anybody, and he hoped nobody would look at him. There was a dog, a stray, ribs like a washboard, some kind of yellow shepherd gone half to bone. It had been nosing the platform for 3 days, and nobody fed it. Warwick had a heel of bread in his coat. His last. He broke it clean in 2. He ate his half slow, the way a man eats when he doesn't know where the next one comes from. And he set the other half down on the boards, and the dog took it and did not even growl, and after that the dog lay down against his leg. And the 2 of them kept each other's warm. Nell watched that from behind her counter. She wiped a glass she'd already wiped. She had seen 100 men come through cold, and she had a hard rule about not seeing them, because you cannot feed the whole road on a widow's wages. But she saw him break the bread. And she saw the dog. And something in her chest turned over. When he'd come in earlier, out of the wind for 1 minute, he had touched the brim of a hat that wasn't there anymore and said, "Morning, ma'am. I won't be in your way." Just that. Ma'am. Like a man raised in a house with a mother in it. And when he'd taken the cup of hot water she pushed across, water because that she could give, he'd wrapped both hands around it and drunk it down slow. In small swallows, with his eyes closed. A man taught manners. A man from a house that was gone. She marked all that. She didn't say anything. She just wiped the glass. The morning wore on. The eastbound was late. Some trouble down the line, the agent said. A coupling gone bad at Hastings. So the men waited, and waiting made them mean. Cold does that to a crowd. They needed something to do with the hour, and there is a kind of man who, given a cold hour, will always find the smallest person in the room and warm himself on him. Warwick came in off the platform when his fingers would no longer bend. He came to the lunch counter. He stood a respectful distance back, hat that wasn't there in his hands. "Ma'am," he said to Nell, "Lo, I don't have money for a cup. But I'll sweep your platform for one. Clean it end to end. Coal dust, cigarette ends, all of it. I'm a fair hand with a broom." Before Nell could answer, Tolliver was there. He'd been at the stove with his cronies and he'd heard, and he came over rubbing his hands the way a man does who's found his sport. "Sweep the platform," he said, loud, turning it out to the room. "You hear that? The tramp wants to negotiate." He looked Warwick up and down, the frayed cuffs, the boot sole tied on with wire, the gray stubble. "You know what we do with your kind here, old man? We have an ordinance. Town Ordinance 9. Vagrancy, no visible means of support. You're subject to arrest and a night in the cellar under the bank." He said it like scripture. He was a councilman, he'd helped write it. "So you'll take your broom and your fleas and you'll get off this property before I have Deke run you in." Warwick did not argue. That was the thing about him. He never argued. He said yes sir didn't mean trouble, and he made to go, but Deke Roush was already coming. Railroad detective. The yard bull. A big, soft-faced man who'd wanted to be a real policeman his whole life and had landed as a company cop instead, and who made up for the difference by being hard where hardness was cheap. He had a billy on a thong, and he liked to swing it. He liked the word ordinance. He liked a man he could push who wouldn't push back. "Hold up," Roush said. "Councilman's right. We had a boxcar broke into at Ravenna last week. You empty that." He pointed his billy at Warwick's bindle, the roll of blanket and canvas Warwick carried everything he owned inside. "Regulations. I got to check a transient for stolen goods. Dump it. On the boards." Now, there was no stolen anything, and everyone knew it. That was the point. The point was to make an old man kneel down in front of the room and turn out his pockets. Warwick knelt. He untied the bindle with hands that shook a little, from cold or from something else, and he emptied it slow onto the platform boards. It was nothing. It was the sum of a life, and it was nothing. A tin plate. A spoon worn thin. A razor with no handle. A photograph gone to sepia. A woman in a gingham dress squinting at a son 16 years dead. A second coat. Old army wool. The drab gone gray. Folded careful, and where it fell open you could see, if you knew to look, that the lining had been mended by hand, and that something stiff and flat was sewn up inside it, along the left breast, under where a pocket would be. A little rigid rectangle, hand stitched into the cloth. Nobody in that room knew to look. But you do. Remember it. And out of the fold of that coat slid a small thing. Folded paper, dark with old grease, soft as a rag from being carried. A pawn ticket. Warwick moved for the first time. Not for the photograph. Not for the coat. For the ticket. He put his hand down over it fast, flat on the boards, the way a man covers a coal that's rolled out of the stove. It was the only thing in the whole spill of his life he reached to protect. Roush saw the move and made something of it. "What's that? What are you hiding?" He put the toe of his boot on the back of Warwick's wrist, not hard, just enough. "Show me." Warwick lifted his hand. The ticket lay there. Roush bent, picked it up, turned it over, couldn't make much of it. "Pawn stub," he said, disgusted, and the disgust was because there was nothing to it. It was just a pawn stub. The kind 100 broke men carried. Every road had them. You hawked your watch in Omaha and carried the stub till you could redeem it, which you never could, and it went soft in your pocket, and you carried it anyway. Junk, Roush said, and he dropped it back in the dust. Warwick picked it up. He put it inside his shirt, against his skin. He gathered his life back into the canvas without a word, tied it, and carried it out to the cold end of the platform. And the dog got up and went with him. And that was the only creature in Kearsley Junction that morning that treated him like a man. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because now the eastbound came. You heard it first, the long low note of the whistle out past the elevator, then the ground took up a hum, and then the headlamp swung around the curve and the men crowded the platform edge, because a train coming in is the one event a dead town has. The locomotive came through huge and slow, bleeding steam, the drivers taller than a man, and behind it the mail car, the baggage, 2-day coaches with faces at the fogged glass. And last, coupled to the tail, the private car. Dark green, brass rails, and off the rear platform, snapping in the wind of its own passage, that flag. 2 white stars on a red field. And Elias Warwick, at the cold end of the boards, did a thing his body did before his mind could stop it. He stood up. He put his heels together. He brought his chin up and his shoulders back, and his hands flat to the seams of his ragged trousers. He came to attention. For the flag. 3 full seconds he stood there like that, not like a bum, not like anything the town had seen, like a soldier. Spine like a plumb line, eyes front. 40 years and 40 pounds and the whole ruin of his life fell off him, and for 3 seconds you could see the man who had been. Then he caught himself. You could watch him remember what he was now. The shoulders came down. The chin dropped. He folded back into the old hobo at the cold end of the platform, and he sat down on his heels, and it was gone. 2 people saw it. You saw it. And a 12-year-old boy saw it. Sam, Tolliver's errand boy. 12 years old, quick, always at the councilman's elbow running for cigarettes and running for coffee, wearing a cap too big and shoes with the toes gone soft. Sam saw the old man snap to like a soldier and he didn't understand it, and not understanding it, he filed it away the way boys do. The eastbound stopped. There was trouble at the head end. The same bad coupling. They'd have to cut it and reset. 20 minutes, the conductor called. 20 minutes, folks. So the private car sat there stopped on the platform, with its flag hanging still now in the lee of the depot roof. And inside the town had 20 minutes more of the cold and the mean. Tolliver had not let go of the morning sport. He was warm, and he was bored, and there was still the old man out there in the wind. He crooked a finger at Sam. Boy, see that stub the tramp's so proud of? The one he grabbed like it was gold? Tolliver grinned around at the stove crowd, setting them up for it. Go get it. Let's hear what treasure a rail rider's hiding. Sam didn't want to. I'll tell you that now. Because it matters later. Something in him didn't want to. But he was 12, and Tolliver was the man who paid his mother for his running, and when a man like that says go, a boy goes. Sam went out onto the cold end of the platform. Mister, he said. Mister, he wants your paper. Warwick looked at the boy a long moment. Not angry. Tired. He said, Quiet, son. It's not worth anything to anybody but me. Tell him you couldn't get it. But Tolliver was watching, and Roush had drifted out behind the boy with his billy, and Sam was caught between the old man's tired eyes and the whole warm room waiting to laugh. And 12 is too young to stand against a room. Sam's hand darted out fast, the way a boy's does, and he had the ticket out of Warwick's shirt before Warwick could close his hand, and he ran back to the door with it, and Warwick half rose and then sat back down. Because what was he going to do? Chase a child, and get run in under Ordinance 9 for it. Sam handed the ticket to Tolliver, and Tolliver, who liked an audience and did not like to read aloud himself in case there was a hard word in it, handed it back to the boy. Go on. You read it. Let's all hear. So Sam stood by the stove, in front of the dozen warming men, and he unfolded the soft greased dark paper, and he read it out in his high clear boy's voice, stumbling on the printed lines. Sable's Loan Office. Omaha, Nebraska. He squinted. Ticket number 4471. He turned it. There was a line where the pawnbroker had written, in pencil, what the item was. Item held. 1. Sam sounded it out. 1. Military, decoration. For a second nobody got it. Then Tolliver threw his head back and laughed, and the whole stove crowd caught it and roared. Because it was the funniest thing they'd heard all winter, this scarecrow, this louse-ridden rod rider out there in the wind, had pawned a medal, had once somewhere apparently owned a military decoration and hawked it in an Omaha loan office for probably 4 bits and carried the ticket around like it meant something. A medal. Tolliver got out. What a bum like you ever win. A medal for panhandling. And that finished them. They were helpless. One man had to sit down. A decoration. Boys, we got a hero. We got a war hero riding the rods. Salute the general, boys. And a couple of them did mock salutes toward the cold end of the platform, sloppy, laughing so they could barely raise the arm. Out at the far end, Elias Warwick sat on his heels with his back to them and did not turn around. The dog had its head on his boot. The wind came off the plane. He looked at nothing. He let it break over him the way he'd let the cigarette and the vermin and the boot on his wrist break over him. Because he had learned that the only thing you owned out here that no man could take was whether you gave them the satisfaction of your face. So he did not give it. He kept his eyes on the horizon, and his jaw was tight, and that was all. This was the loudest it got. 25% of a man's dignity read out by a child and howled at by a room. Remember that too. Because everything after this is the country remembering what these men forgot. The laughter ran itself out the way laughter does, into coughs and hoo-boys and the scrape of chairs. Sam stood there holding the ticket. He was not laughing. He had done the thing and gotten the room, and instead of feeling big he felt sick, because he had looked at the old man's back while they laughed and the old man had not moved, and there is a particular shame a decent child feels when he's been used to hurt someone who won't even turn around. Sam folded the ticket back up along its soft creases. He did it careful. He didn't know why he was careful. He held on to it. Out at the cold end, Nell Pruitt came. She'd heard all of it from behind her counter, and she'd stood there wiping the same glass with her mouth pressed thin. Because a widow running a lunch counter on a councilman's town does not tell the councilman off. Not if she wants to keep her lease. But she could do one thing. She could always do the one thing. She went to her stove, her own little stove behind the counter, not the town's, and she filled a bowl. Beans she'd cooked for the trainmen, thick with a little fat back in them, and she'd have to mark it as spoilage in the book, which she'd done before and would do again. She carried it out past the freight scale, into the wind, to the man at the cold end. "Here," she said. She held it down to him. "It's off the books. You don't owe me a sweep or a word. Eat it while it's hot." Warwick looked up at her, and for the first time that morning something in his face moved that wasn't a man bracing to be hit. He took the bowl in both hands. He felt the warmth of it go up his arms. "I'll sweep the platform, ma'am," he said. "Tonight, when they've gone. It's not right. Taking and not." "You'll do no such thing," Nell said. "You'll eat. Sit." She lowered herself down onto an overturned crate beside him, in the cold, which no respectable woman in that town would have done, sit in the wind beside a hobo. She sat there anyway. The dog thumped its tail. Warwick ate. He ate slow, like a man who'd been taught, one careful spoonful and then a pause. Though you could see what it cost him to go slow, you could see the 9 days in it. 9 days since a full meal. His hands wanted to shake. Nell didn't watch him eat, to spare him. She looked out at the plane. After a while she said, "Easy, not prying, just making room, you've soldiered." Warwick was quiet a spell. The spoon stopped. "There was a war, ma'am," he said finally. "Lo, I came home." Another pause, and then the thing he almost never said to anyone, said now, maybe because she'd sat down in the cold beside him. Maybe because a bowl of beans buys more truth than a beating ever will. Most of my company didn't. Nell nodded. She did not ask which war, which she knew, or where, or what the ticket said, which she'd heard. She did not press him for the story the way the town would have grabbed at it. She just let those words sit out there in the cold with the two of them and let them be enough. "I'm sorry," she said. "That was all. That's a hard thing to carry home." "Yes, ma'am," Warwick said. "It is." He finished the beans, he wiped the bowl clean with his last thought toward not wasting, and he handed it back and said, "That's the finest meal I've had this year. And I mean that plain," and Nell had to look back out at the plane again. Because her eyes had gone hot and she was 41 years old and had thought herself past crying over the roadmen. You ache, watching this. That's the whole of it. You ache because you can see the whole man, the manners, the straight back that came up for the flag, the company that didn't come home, the medal in the Omaha pawn shop, the ribbon sewn secret in the lining of a coat too proud to wear it and too broke to redeem it. You can see all of it, and the town can see a louse in the wind. That gap is the thing. That gap is the whole story. And it is about to close, hard, from a direction nobody on that platform is watching. Because there was a fourth person who had seen Warwick come to attention. Up in the private car, at the window, a man had been standing. General Aldous Pruitt. 56 years old, 2 stars, traveling west by rail to dedicate a county war memorial 3 stops down the line. A stone shaft with names cut in it. The names of boys from a county he'd never seen, which was the sort of duty they gave a general now, standing over stones. He was a tired man in a warm car. He had been looking out at the frozen little depot with the particular boredom of a man delayed by a coupling, watching the small, ugly theater of a cold town. The fat one in the good coat, the cop with the club, the crowd around the stove, and thinking nothing of it, because he had seen 1,000 cold depots. And then a ragged old man at the far end of the platform had stood up as the car rolled past and come to attention. For the flag. Not a sloppy civilian's hand over heart. The real thing. Heels together, thumbs to the trouser seam, chin level, eyes front, held 3 seconds, clean, and then broken off ashamed. And General Pruitt, who had spent his whole life among men who stood that way and could tell in one glance the trained from the untrained the way a horseman reads a horse, felt something go still and cold and attentive in his chest. He knew that posture. Not the man. The man was a stranger, a wreck, a face in 1,000. But the posture, the particular way the shoulders set. Squared but a shade rolled forward at the top. An old wound's habit that plucked at something so far back in him he could not name it, only feel it, the way you feel a name on your tongue you can't say. He stood at the window after the man had folded back down into a hobo, and he could not look away from the cold end of that platform. He watched the whole thing after that. He couldn't have said why he kept watching. He watched the boy snatch something and run. He watched the crowd at the stove convulse with laughter, couldn't hear the words through the glass, only saw the cruelty of it, the fat man's thrown-back head, the men helpless, and the old soldier at the far end who never once turned around to give them his face. And Pruitt, who had spent 16 years being saluted, felt something he had not felt in a long time, which was shame at his own kind. And under the shame, that other thing, still pulling, I know that man from somewhere no man should be forgotten from. He rang for his aide. The aide was a young captain named Foss. Brisk, well-brushed. The kind of officer who'd never heard a shot and ran a general's errands as if they were the war. He came in. "Sir?" "That man," Pruitt said. He didn't point. He tilted his head at the glass, the old one, at the end of the platform, with the dog. Foss looked. "The tramp, sir?" "The soldier," Pruitt said, and something in how he said it made the captain look again, harder, and still see only a tramp. There was a stub, a pawn ticket. The crowd was laughing over it. The boy read something off it. "I want to see that ticket, Captain. I want it in my hand." Foss did not understand the order and knew better than to say so. "You want me to buy it from him, sir?" Pruitt was quiet. Then, because he was a practical man and did not yet trust the thing pulling at his chest, because maybe I am an old fool at a window making a hero out of a bum, he reached for the plain arrangement. The thing that would be easy and human, and let him see the paper without making a scene of it. "He's hungry. Look at him. Take him a plate, a real one, off my table, hot and $1. And tell him," Pruitt paused, "tell him a gentleman on the car would like to buy that old stub off him as a curiosity, for the $1 and the meal. He can eat, and I'll have my look, and no one's the poorer." He turned from the window. "Be decent about it, Foss. Don't let that crowd near it. Take it to him at the cold end, quiet." "Yes, sir." Foss went to arrange it. And so it came about, in the 20th cold minute of that delay, that Captain Foss walked down the length of the platform, past the stove crowd who went quiet and respectful at the sight of the uniform, past Tolliver who straightened his good coat and half rose hoping to be addressed and was not, past Roush who came to a clumsy version of attention, walked all the way down to the freezing far end where an old hobo sat on his heels with a stray dog and the empty light of a man who has stopped expecting anything. Foss carried a covered plate in one hand. Under the cover was more food than Warwick had seen since the farm: pot roast, potatoes, gravy going cold at the edges, a roll, real butter. In the other hand, Foss had a silver $1 held up where it would catch the light. He crouched down. He was gentle about it. Say that for him. "Old-timer," Foss said. "There's a gentleman on the private car. He's taken a kindly interest. He'd like you to have a hot meal. This is off his own table. And this $1. And in trade he asks only one small thing." Foss set the plate down on the boards where the smell of it rose up warm and enormous into the cold. "That pawn stub of yours. The little paper. He collects such curiosities. The meal and the $1 for the stub. That's the whole of it." Warwick looked at the plate. God help him, he looked at the plate a long time. 9 days. The steam came off the meat and went straight up his nose and into the empty pit of him, and his stomach cramped so hard it was almost a sound. A silver $1. A hot dinner off a rich man's table. All he had to do was hand over a soft square of greased dark paper that a boy had already read out to a laughing room. A paper that couldn't buy him a cup of coffee, a stub for a medal he would never in this life have the $6.50 to redeem. His hand went, slow, toward the shirt where the ticket lay against his skin. And then it stopped. The wind came off the plane. The dog lifted its head. Down the platform the men waited at the warm stove for the eastbound to get its coupling fixed. None of them looking, none of them knowing that the whole weight of the thing was balanced right here, on the cold end of the boards, on whether a starving man would trade the last paper that said his name had ever meant something for a plate of meat. The captain waited, smiling, sure, and Warwick's hand hung there, over his heart, over the paper, over the plate. He drew the hand back. It was a small thing, a man's hand moving 4 inches through cold air back to his lap. But Foss saw it, and the smile on the captain's face went stiff at the corners. "I sold that medal once," Warwick said. His voice was low. It did not shake. "When the choice was that or starve. I did it. I'm not proud of it. Old-timer, but that paper says it was mine." Warwick looked at the plate, and then he looked at the man crouched over it. "The medal's gone. I know that. I'll never have the $6.50 to bring it home. But I won't sell the last paper that says my name meant something. Not for a hot dinner. Not for $1. Not for 10. The steam kept rising off the meat. It was the cruelest smell in the world, and he made himself not smell it. "Take it back to your gentleman," Warwick said. "Tell him thank you. Tell him no." Foss stayed crouched a moment longer. He was a young man, and something moved behind his eyes that he did not have a word for. Then he stood. He picked up the plate. He left the silver dollar where it was on the boards, glinting, and he did not say anything about that. He turned and walked back up the platform toward the private car, past the stove, past the men who watched him go with the plate still full. Warwick looked at the dollar in the dust. He did not touch it. After a while the wind moved it an inch, and it lay there shining, and he let it shine. Nell had seen the whole thing from the counter window. She did not understand all of it. But she understood a starving man had pushed away a hot meal. And she pressed her hand flat against the glass and did not know why her eyes stung. Inside the private car it was warm and close, and Captain Foss set the untouched plate down on the polished table and stood at a loss. "He wouldn't take it, sir." General Aldous Pruitt sat by the window in his shirt sleeves, an old man with a hard, clean-shaved jaw and 2 stars folded on the coat that hung by the door. He did not turn from the glass. "The dollar? Left it lying in the dirt, sir, didn't touch it." "And the ticket?" "Kept it, sir." Foss hunted for the words. He said he'd sold the metal once already. Wouldn't sell the paper, too. Said his name meant something. And that stub was all that said so. For a long moment the general did not speak. Out on the platform the ragged man sat at the cold end with his knees drawn up and a stray dog against his leg, and the lamplight caught the side of his face, and the general watched him the way a man watches a word he cannot quite remember on the tip of his tongue. "Fetch me that ticket anyway," Pruitt said. "Sir, he won't. Not to buy. Ask to borrow it." 2 minutes. "Give him your word as an officer it comes back to his hand." He turned from the window at last. "Tell him the gentleman only wants to read it. Tell him nobody's taking anything." So Foss went back down the boards. He crouched again by the old man, and this time he had no plate and no dollar in his hands, only his hat, and he spoke to him quiet and plain. Warwick listened. He looked a long time at the young officer's face. Then he reached inside his shirt, against the skin, and drew out the folded paper, warm from his body, and he held it out. 2 minutes, Foss said. "On my honor." "On your honor," Warwick said, and let it go. Foss carried it up the platform between 2 fingers like it might break. In the warm car he laid it on the table before the general. Pruitt took a pair of spectacles from his breast pocket and set them on his nose. He unfolded the grease-dark stub with the care you'd give a field map. And he read it. Sable's Loan Office. Omaha, Nebraska. Ticket 4471. 1 military decoration. And a date. Penciled small in the corner where the pawnbroker had noted the origin the old man must have told him. October, 1918. The general went very still. He knew that month the way he knew his own heartbeat. He had spent 16 years not being able to forget it. 1918, the Meuse Argonne, the wire and the machine guns and the mud that swallowed men whole. He had been a green lieutenant then, 22 years old and certain he was going to die in a shell hole with his leg open to the bone, and he would have, except a hand had closed on his collar and dragged him back across 40 yards of open ground while the guns walked their fire up and down the line. He had never learned the name. He had been half out of his mind with the wound. He remembered a face over him, close and sooted black, and a voice saying, "Hold on, sir, I've got you, hold on," and then the litter and the surgeon and the months of fever. When he came back to himself and asked, they told him the corporal who carried him had been transferred, or invalided, or lost in the shuffle of a war that lost men by the trainload. He had looked. For 16 years, on and off, whenever a memorial brought him past a town, he had looked for the man. He looked out the window at the cold end of the platform. "Foss," he said, and his voice was not quite steady. "Take the ticket back to him. This minute, exactly as you promised. Put it in his hand and thank him." "Yes, sir, and then find the station master. I want the telegraph." The telegraph key clattered in the little office while the eastbound's coupling was hammered back into true, and word went east down the wire to Omaha in the cold blue dusk. Sable's loan office. Does your house still hold, unredeemed, against ticket 44711 United States military decoration? Reply Kearsley Junction, urgent, General A. Pruitt. Out on the platform the men were still at the stove, and they did not know a wire was singing over their heads. They knew only that the freak show had gone dull. Tolliver had come back out in his good wool coat, and he stood warming his backside at the fire and worked the crowd the way a man works a room he owns. "Still here," Tolliver said, loud, nodding down at the cold end. "Our decorated hero. Careful, boys, don't crowd him. He's important. Got a medal." He grinned. "For panhandling, wasn't it, Sam? What'd the papers say?" The boy Sam stood at the edge of the lamplight and did not answer. He had his hands jammed in his pockets. He was looking at the old man at the cold end, and he had been looking at him for an hour, and something had gone wrong in the boy's stomach that he could not fix. "Cat got him," a loafer said, and they laughed, and the boy flushed and looked at his boots. Foss came down the boards and knelt and gave the ticket back into Warwick's hand, and Warwick tucked it away against his skin without a word, and the young officer went back up the platform, and the men watched him go and made their jokes about rich men and their errands. None of them saw the general's face in the lit window. None of them saw him watching. The wire came back at full dark. The station master brought the flimsy yellow slip into the car himself, holding it like it was hot. Pruitt read it once, standing, and then he sat down slow. Sable's loan office confirmed. Ticket 4471 held unredeemed 2 winters. 1 decoration, brass and enamel, a 5-pointed star on a blue ribbon field. And a line the pawnbroker had added on his own, maybe hoping to move it. Relic buyer down from Council Bluffs offered to purchase same for the medal. "We'll hold 7 days for your reply." For the medal. The highest thing this country could hang on a man's chest, and a scrap dealer wanted to melt it for the brass. Pruitt folded the slip once and pressed it flat with his thumb, and sat a while with his jaw working. "Sir," Foss said, "wire back. Redemption fee in full, and whatever the relic man offered, and $1 more than that tonight. My personal draft. They'll have it confirmed at the bank by morning." He stood and reached for his coat, the one with the 2 stars. "And the medal ships to me here. Nowhere else. Into my hand." "Yes, sir, right now?" "Right now." Foss went. The key started up again, urgent in the dark. And General Pruitt stood in the middle of the swaying car with his stars in his hands, and he looked out through the glass at the ragged old man at the cold end of the platform, and he had to sit down again, because his legs would not quite hold him. He was not ready. That was the truth of it. A man rehearses a thing for 16 years, and then it is in front of him, and he is not ready. He needed a minute. He allowed himself the minute. He was an old man, and he had earned it. It was the minute that nearly cost everything. Out on the platform, the westbound freight came up out of the west, a long dark string of empties and reefers, and it did not stop for Kearsley Junction, only slowed to take on water at the tank. Its whistle tore across the flat, and the men at the stove flinched and grinned at each other, and the boy Sam, watching the cold end, saw the old man's head come up. Warwick had heard that whistle his whole life now. He knew what it meant. A slow freight, watering, and then gone west into the dark and the empty country where no man knew his name, and no boy read his ticket to a laughing room, and no rich man sent a plate down to test whether he'd sell the last of himself for meat. He was tired. He was tired all the way down. The reading had gone into him deeper than any of them knew. 1. Military, decoration in a child's voice, and the howl that came after. He could still hear it. He would hear it a long time. And a hot plate sent down like alms, and $1 left shining in the dirt, and every face on that platform that had looked at him and seen refuse. Better to be nobody in the dark than a joke in the light. He got up. His knees cracked. The dog stood too and looked at him, and he put his hand once on the rough head, and then he gathered his bindle, and his tin plate, and his thin spoon, and the razor with no handle, and the little sepia picture of Ada in her gingham dress, and he rolled them tight and slung them. And he walked stiff toward the freight, sliding slow past the far end of the boards. He picked his car. An empty reefer, the door cracked, the rod under it running black and greasy in the lamplight. He'd done it 1,000 times. You matched your pace, and you swung, and you were gone. He set himself. He reached for the grab iron. Mister. It was Sam. The boy had come off the platform running, his cap falling off behind him, his voice cracking high. Mister, wait, don't mister. Warwick. Nell was out from behind her counter, out in the cold with no coat, her hand up. Elias, don't you get on that train, Elias. Down the platform the yard bull Deke Roush turned at the noise and saw the vagrant swinging for a moving freight. And his whole small law rose up in him, and he came at a heavy run with his club already out. Off it. Off that car, you. Off it. Not to save the man. To stop him. To catch him breaking the ordinance one last time. Warwick's hand closed on the iron. His boot found the rod. The freight pulled at him, the whole cold weight of the West pulling at him to let go and be gone. And a voice came across the yard. It did not shout. It did not have to. It was a voice pitched to carry over gunfire and drill fields and 16 years, and it landed on the old man's back like a hand. Corporal. Warwick's boot stopped on the rod. The freight went on without him, car after dark car, and he stood there half-mounted with his hand on the iron and the whole train sliding past his face. And slowly, his hand came open. His boot came down onto the boards. And he turned around. General Aldous Pruitt stood in the full lamplight at the center of the platform, in his uniform, 2 stars burning on each shoulder, an old man ramrod straight in the cold. The men at the stove had gone dead silent. Tolliver's grin had frozen and was sliding off his face. Nell stood with both hands at her mouth. Sam had stopped where he was, 10 feet off, staring. Pruitt came down the platform. The loafers fell back on either side to let him through, pressing against the depot wall, hats coming off heads without a word. He walked the whole length of it, past the stove, past Tolliver, past the frozen bull with his club half raised. And he did not look at any of them. He looked only at the ragged old man at the end of the boards. He stopped 6 feet from him. And General Aldous Pruitt, 2 stars on his shoulder, 56 years old, raised his gloved hand slow to the brim of his cap and held a salute to a hobo in a threadbare coat, with a bindle on his shoulder and no handle on his razor. He held it. 3 full seconds, the same 3 seconds the old man had given the flag. On your feet, Pruitt said. His voice carried the length of the platform and past it, out into the dark. He did not turn his head, but every man there knew the words were for them. Every man here. Off the benches. On your feet. Nobody moved for a heartbeat. Then a bench scraped. Then another. The loafers came up off their seats one by one, awkward hats in their hands, not understanding and not daring not to. You are standing, Pruitt said, in the presence of the Congressional Medal of Honor. The highest thing this country can give to a man. There is nothing above it. Generals do not have it. Presidents do not have it. This man has it. He let his salute down at last, slow, and you gave him your laughter. The silence after that was a physical thing. You could hear the freight dwindling west, and the wind, and the tick of the cooling stove. Warwick stood with the bindle still on his shoulder and his mouth working and no sound coming out. Sir, he managed. General. I don't. You've got the wrong. October, 1918, Pruitt said. The Meuse Argonne. The wire cut us down in the open before a machine gun nest we couldn't see. I was a lieutenant, 22 years old. I took mine in the leg, and I lay in a shell hole, and I was going to die there. His voice did not rise, but it filled the whole cold platform. And a corporal came out for me. Across 40 yards of open ground with the guns walking up and down it. He got me by the collar and he dragged me back. And then he went out again. And again. 3 times, into that fire, and carried out 2 more men, and took the shrapnel in his own back doing it, and when they brought the litter he would not lie down on it until every last man was clear. He looked at the ragged figure in front of him, and his old jaw shook, and he mastered it. I never learned his name. I have looked for him for 16 years. He took 1 step closer. I have looked for you, Corporal Warwick. I have looked for you for 16 years, and I find you at the cold end of a train platform, being called vermin by men who aren't fit to black your boots. Warwick's face had come apart. 16 years of walking, of eyes down, of we don't feed vermin, and here was the boy he'd carried, grown gray, standing straight and calling him by the name the war had given him. They didn't know, Warwick said. His voice broke on it. Sir, they didn't know. No, Pruitt said, they didn't. And now, at last, he turned. He turned, and he looked down the platform at the men against the wall, and his eyes went along them slow, one face at a time, and every man he touched with that look flinched and dropped his eyes. They stopped on Vernon Tolliver. Tolliver stood by the stove in his good wool coat, and the coat did not help him now. He tried a smile. It died. He tried words. General, sir, how was I to know? A man comes in off the rods, no coat. No. How was any of us to know what you were to treat a stranger like a man? Pruitt said. Flat, quiet, it carried like a shot. That was all. That was all it ever took. You didn't need to know he was a hero. You needed to know he was cold. He held Tolliver's eye until the grain man could not hold his. That was all it ever took, and you didn't have it in you. Tolliver's mouth opened and closed. He looked around at the men he'd led in the laughing an hour ago, and not one of them would meet his eye now, and he saw the whole of his standing in that town go out like a snuffed lamp. He sat down slow on the bench behind him, in his good coat, and he put his eyes on the boards, and he was ruined, and he knew it. The general's gaze moved on. It found the bull. Deke Roush stood frozen where the general's coming had caught him, the club still half up in his hand, 41 years old and 16 of them a railroad man. A man who did what rank told him and never once asked why. You, Pruitt said. Detective, put up that club. The club went down. Fast, you shook this man's belongings out onto these boards this afternoon. In front of a crowd. You emptied his life into the dirt looking for goods he'd stolen, and you found a tin plate and a worn-out spoon and a picture of his dead wife. The general's voice did not lift, and that was the terrible thing about it. You'll stand at attention while I finish. Heels together. Chin up. You know how. You'll hold it till I release you. And the bull, who obeyed rank the way other men breathe, snapped to it before he could think. Heels together. Chin up. Club at his side. He stood rigid in the cold, and the sweat came out on his face despite the January air, because the same reflex that had made him a hard man was holding him now like a nail through the foot. And there was no order in the world he could reach for to get himself out of it. He stood, and he sweated, and he heard every word. Pruitt turned back to Warwick. There's a thing you don't know, he said, gentler now. Your medal. Sable's loan office in Omaha. It's held there 2 winters. A relic dealer offered to buy it this week, for the metal, to melt it. Warwick shut his eyes. I've wired them tonight, Pruitt said. Redemption paid in full. The dealer's price and more, so there's no argument. It ships here, to my hand, and nowhere else. He put his gloved hand on the old man's ragged shoulder. You're not going to sell your name a second time, Corporal. Nobody's ever going to make you choose that again. Warwick stood with his eyes shut and the tears running down into the gray stubble, and he did not wipe them, and no man on that platform would have dared to think less of him for it. The bindle slid off his shoulder and hit the boards, the tin plate ringing, and he did not reach for it. 16 years. He had believed his honor died the winter he handed the medal across a pawnbroker's counter for $6.50 to buy coal and bread the year Ada was dying of the fever anyway. He had carried the ticket against his skin all that time, not because he thought he'd redeem it, but because it was the last paper that said the man he'd been had ever existed at all. And here was that man, come back for him, in the shape of a boy he'd dragged out of the mud. Sam came through the crowd. The boy was crying and trying not to, the way 12-year-old boys do, jaw clamped, face working. He had the ticket. Somewhere in the confusion he had his own thing. He pushed through past the men's legs, and he stood in front of the old man he'd mocked to a laughing room. And he held out both his hands, and in them was the boy's cap, and folded on top of the cap, smoothed out as flat as he could get it, Warwick's hand went to his shirt, and the ticket was still there, warm. The boy had not taken it. The boy had taken nothing. The boy was holding out his own cap, and his own 2 hands, and the only thing he had, which was sorry. "I didn't know, mister." Sam got out. "I read it out and I didn't. I'm sorry. I'm awful sorry." Warwick looked down at the boy a long moment. Then he crouched, slow, his old knees complaining, down to the boy's level, and he did not take the cap. He took the boy's 2 hands in his 2 hands. The work-hard, cracked hands of a hobo around a child's cold fingers. "Son," he said, "you were told to. By a man you thought you had to mind. That's not your sin to carry." He pressed the small hands once. "Put your cap on. It's cold." Sam put his cap on. He was crying openly now and past caring who saw. Nell had come up beside him, her face wet, her coatless arms wrapped around herself. And she looked at Warwick crouched there in the lamplight and she said, "Soft. You said most of your company didn't come home." "No, ma'am," Warwick said. "They didn't. And you carried 3 of them out anyway. Wasn't a thing to decide, ma'am." He stood up, slow. They were mine. The snow had started. It came down fine and slow through the lamplight, the first of it. And it caught on the 2 stars, and on the old man's bare gray head, and on the boy's cap, and the whole platform stood in it, hushed, the loafers with their hats in their hands, Tolliver on his bench with his eyes down, the bull rigid and sweating at his attention, the widow and the boy and the 2 old soldiers in the falling snow. "General," Warwick said. He straightened. Something came into the ragged old body that had not been there in 16 years. Some line of the spine, some lift of the chin. He brought his heels together on the frost-slick boards. And his hand came up. The same hand that had reached for the boxcar iron a few minutes past came up sure and square to his brow, a salute that his body had never once forgotten. And he held it, and Pruitt returned it, and the 2 of them stood there in the snow, saluting, an old general and an old hobo. 16 years and 40 yards of open fire between them, and there was not a sound on the whole platform but the wind. "At ease, Corporal," Pruitt said at last. "Lo, you've stood long enough. 16 years is long enough." The medal came up from Omaha 6 days later, on the noon train. Word had gone through Kearsley Junction in that week the way fire goes through dry grass, and by the time the noon train blew for the crossing, the platform that had jeered was full of people come to stand quiet. Nell had closed the counter and swept it clean and set a white cloth on it. General Pruitt had wired ahead and delayed his memorial dedication a full week to be present. And he stood in his uniform by the counter with a small flat parcel that the expressman had put into his hands and no one else's. Warwick stood in the same threadbare coat. He would wear no other. It was the coat he'd carried through 16 winters, with the faded ribbon bar sewn inside the lining at the left breast, where he could feel it against his heart when he had nothing else, and Pruitt had asked him if he wanted a new one for the occasion, and Warwick had said no. "Sir, this one'll do." This one was there. Pruitt opened the flat case on the white cloth. Inside, on a bed of blue, lay the 5-pointed star on its ribbon, brass and enamel, dulled a little from 2 winters in a pawnbroker's drawer, but whole, unmelted, saved. The general lifted it out. He turned to the old man. And in front of the town that had called him vermin, in front of Tolliver standing at the back with his hat in his hands. In front of the bull standing straight of his own will this time and not from any order, in front of the widow and the boy and the loafers and the station master, General Aldous Pruitt pinned the Medal of Honor back onto the threadbare coat of Corporal Elias Warwick over the left breast, over the ribbon in the lining, over the heart. And the old man, who had not broken through any of it, not the mockery, not the reading, not the salute in the snow, the old man broke now. He stood with the star on his chest and the tears came, and this time he let them, and Nell reached out and took his arm, and he let her, and the whole platform stood silent and let an old soldier weep for the 16 years he'd spent believing he was nothing. That was the winter of it. A year on, it is spring on the Nebraska plain, and the wheat is coming up green to the edge of the world, and the wind that comes across it is warm now and smells of turned earth instead of ice. Elias Warwick has a room over Nell's lunch counter. He does not ride the rods anymore. He does not ask anyone for anything anymore. He mends the depot's benches for his keep, and repairs the porch rail, and each morning he sweeps the platform where he once offered to sweep it for a cup of coffee and was refused. Sweeps it now because it is his, because he belongs to this place and it belongs to him. Above Nell's register, screwed to the wall where the morning light finds it and where every traveler who buys a cup of coffee has to look at it, hangs the medal in a frame. Under it, small, is the citation. People read it. People who have ridden in cold off a freight and been treated like refuse somewhere down the line read it and look at the gray old man mending the bench in the sun. And something eases in them. Vernon Tolliver lost his council seat that next fall. The town remembered. He buys his coffee at Nell's counter now, because it is the only counter in town, and he drinks it standing under the framed star, and he does not say anything, and no one says anything to him, and that is the whole of his sentence, and it is enough. Deke Roush is still the yard bull. But last month a young man came through on a westbound, half froze, no coat, riding the rods, and the bull walked him not to the edge of the ordnance but into Nell's warm counter, and set down the price of a bowl of beans, and told the boy to eat, and walked out before he could be thanked. Nobody told him to do it. That is the thing. Nobody had to. And Elias Warwick sweeps his platform in the spring light with the medal watching from the wall inside, and when the train stops he touches his hat to the ladies and says ma'am, and eats slow like a man taught his manners in a house that's gone, and he is at peace. Some honors a man can pawn. When the winter is hard enough and the choice is that or starve, a man will hand the highest thing across a counter for $6.50 and hate himself for 16 years. But here is the thing they don't tell you. The country that a man saves has a long memory. It doesn't forget. And sooner or later, on a cold platform at the end of the line, it comes walking down through the crowd in its full dress, and it stops in front of the forgotten one. And it salutes first, and it redeems the ticket. Tell me the town you're watching from tonight. And tell me, do you know an old soldier the world stopped seeing?